Questioning everything is the fastest way to awaken and the easiest way to court trouble. What if a single man, with nothing but a stubborn smile and a pocket full of questions, could make a city pause its breath and listen to its own beliefs? In the streets of Athens, where bronze and marble carry the weight of 100 myths, Socrates walked with a quiet energy that felt like a spark in dry tinder. Athens was a marketplace of ideas, a theater of opinions, where the cleverest soldiers wore opinions like armor and won debates the way other men won battles. The young minds chased prestige and victory, the elders guarded tradition, and the poets sang of virtue as if it were a coin to be spent. Into this buzzing agora stepped Socrates, not to conquer with rhetoric, but to pry open with questions. He carried no doctrine about to be defended, only a method to test everything. He began with questions that others had learned to answer with certainty. What is courage? What is justice? What is piety? Not to destroy faith, but to test its shape, to see if it could survive close inspection. His approach was simple and stubborn. Ask until a belief cracks, then ask again, until the crack reveals a flaw that can be examined, revised, or discarded. The shimmering phrase of his era truth was not a fixed treasure, but a horizon that moved as the wind of inquiry moved us. His method was not triumphal. It was a tool for humility. He treated ignorance as a starting line, not a finish line. I know that I know nothing, he would say, and in that admission lay a double edge. It shields you from pretension and forces you to test what you claim to know. He didn't demand certainty. He demanded responsibility for the claims you own. If a belief could not withstand a careful dialogue, perhaps it deserved scrutiny, or perhaps it deserved to be left behind. The core of his inquiry was a practice, not a proclamation, a linkus. The art of cross-examination by asking questions that reveal contradictions. He didn't hammer people with authority. He invited them into a corridor of questions, one bend at a time, until they found what held steady and what did not. The aim was not to win an argument, but to uncover the living truth that could guide action in the real world. If a city wants to be brave, it must be willing to redefine courage in moments of doubt, not merely celebrate certainty when it feels convenient. Socrates spent years in dialogue with politicians, craftsmen, poets, and scholars. He tested the wisdom of the sophists, who claimed to teach virtue for a fee and persuaded crowds with clever words. He challenged the young to think for themselves, not to repeat the slogans that made them popular. He asked whether being just could be measured by the opinions of the many, or whether the measure of justice depended on something deeper, something that stood outside the crowd's roar. In this sense, he was a critic of convention, but not a hater of tradition. He knew that every culture builds its own safe havens, its rituals and stories that give people a sense of belonging. Yet belonging without truth is a fragile thing, a house built on shifting sands. For definitions that could endure scrutiny, what is virtue, and can virtue be taught? If someone claims to know the good, what makes that knowledge reliable? If a law harms the soul, what is the measure of the right thing to do? The more Socrates pressed, the more uneasy the room became. The traditional authorities, the men who wore power like a cloak, felt their bastions tremble. It wasn't that he broke laws with indignation. It was that he refused to grant their beliefs the sanctity of unquestionable truth. He asked whether cherished customs were timeless truths or convenient habits, useful for a moment, but not for a life of reflection. In a culture that equated wisdom with eloquence and authority with certainty, Socrates offered something unsettling, a persistent invitation to examine oneself in the mirror of reason. TSKS of dissent rose. Elders and reformers alike found themselves answering a challenge that felt personal. Are you living by what you know, or hiding behind what you presume you know? He did not demand everyone adopt his answers. He demanded they test theirs. That is a powerful, dangerous gift to a city so protective of its self-image. And so the climate shifted slowly, like a reed bending in a wind you cannot see but can feel. Athens, proud of its democracy and its heritage, was divided by his questions. Some saw him as a corrupter of youth, a man who drew away the crowd from the comfortable certainties of tradition. Others saw him as a necessary irritant, a physician for the soul who treated dogma with the scalpel of doubt so citizens could recover a healthier faith, a faith not in authority but in truth itself. The trial came as a final test, not just of a man, but of a culture's readiness to face its own limits. The charges were grave, corrupting the youth and empire. He faced a jury that measured him not only by his ideas, but by what those ideas did to the social order. He could have fled or compromised, blinded by fear or soothed by trivial concessions. He did not. He spoke as a living example of his method, choosing a path that would define what it means to stay true to one's inquiry, even in the shadow of the crowd. In his defense, Socrates spoke of a life examined as the only life worth living, of a duty to question not for the sake of rebellion, but for the sake of clarity. He did not pretend to possess certainty where it did not exist. Rather, he asked the jurors to reflect on the cost of certainty when it is bought at the price of the soul. If he had a truth, it was not a polished idol, but a living process, an ongoing conversation with oneself and with others about what counts as good. He accepted the verdict with a calm that felt like a quiet rebellion against the fear that had gripped Athens. The manner of his death carried an emblematic weight. It was not a ceremonial defiance. It was a choice and ethical act that matched the method he had practiced all his life. He could have argued for a delay. He could have fled to some remote corner of the polis. But he chose to remain and to show that a life guided by the pursuit of truth can endure even when it is judged by its consequences. His death, in that sense, became a public testament to the stubborn beauty of rigorous inquiry. Not immunity from consequence, but integrity within consequence. Now, why does this matter to us, centuries later, far from marble stoas and the smell of olive oil? Because Socrates didn't simply challenge beliefs. He modeled a discipline of thinking that survives regimes, summons, and trends. His method persists in classrooms and cafes whenever we pause before a common assumption and ask, what do we actually mean by this? How we test it? What if the opposite is true? In that space, a culture learns to think, not just to feel or to fear. The twist is not that he opposed every tradition, but that he offered a way to test every tradition. The twist is that his downfall became a blueprint for modern skepticism, the idea that philosophy is not a distant luxury, but a practical tool for living. The turning point is the recognition that the courage to doubt can be more humane, more truthful, than the certainty that never questions its own foundations. To challenge convention is to honor the best part of human reason, our relentless tendency to refine, to revise, to grow wiser when our beliefs are forced to justify themselves. Resolution. If we want a world that grows, we must cultivate the Socratic habit as a daily discipline, a willingness to admit what we don't know, to test what we think we know, and to listen even when the sound of contradiction jars us awake. Socrates did not leave a rule book behind. He left a method that asks, with patience and audacity, whether our laws, our loves, and our loyalties are still worthy of trust when faced with the hardest questions. In a time that often rewards loud certainty, that quiet, stubborn method offers a different power. The power to adapt without selling out what we truly value. Ultra. So when you hear someone claim to hold the truth with absolute ownership, remember the gadfly of Athens. Remember that the stubborn endurance of a single question can slow the rush of a crowd. The point is not to defeat beliefs, but to refine them, to keep our communities honest about what they claim to know, and to remind ourselves that a life of thinking is a life of choosing again and again what we will accept as real. If a city can't survive questioning itself, what does that imply for our own lives today in the face of doubt, fear, and change? The invitation is simple. Stay curious, stay rigorous, stay humane. Let the questions you carry be your compass, not your chains. And if you ever find yourself asking, why should we question anything at all? Answer with a question of your own. What truth will we lose by not asking? And what truth could we gain if we dare to live